Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we continue to discover what makes a bestseller and inspire you to start, finish and publish your book. I'm Mark DeVoe.
And I'm Mark Stay. As always, a enormous Titanic size thank you to everyone who supports this podcast, either on Patreon or in the Bestseller Academy. Now, if you want to support the podcast, if you sign up, you do the $10 a month option, you get access to deep dives a go-go. I mean, we're talking hours and hours and hours of extra stuff. So it's talking about, I don't know, TikTok and screenwriting and forensics and blurbs and all sorts of amazing stuff. We've got a great one on police procedurals. If you listen to this because you want to know about crime, all sorts of great stuff. So go to bestsellerexperiment.com/support, sign up, you get access to all that stuff right away. If you want to sign up to the Academy, now the doors are opening soon, I believe, Mr. D. Tell them about that.
Mark, actually. Yeah, the doors are open. So folks, we're coming up to the end of the year. Big time of review of your writing. Have you really made the most of this last year, or has procrastination or things or life got in the way, as it does for so many of us? Well, the Academy is the answer to your prayers, really. It is a way of coming into a community, declaring that you're going to do this and somehow fit around your busy life if you are working or you've got kids, or if you're not and you're retired and you've just thought, where's life going? And I'm so busy in retirement, but you want to write that book, then the Academy is the place to go. So pop along to academy.bestsellerexperiment.com and register your interest now. There are limited spaces. We have to usually close it off early because there's so much demand, but we're opening the doors a bit early, and we want to hear about your writing goals and dreams. And we're here to support you in the Academy next year. So do that, sir. So Mr. Stay, how are you doing today? Is it, you got some, chilly weather now? I guess the garden must be getting closed up, is it? The missus is closing up the garden, is she, for the winter?
Actually, thanks to climate change. No.
You're getting a fresh harvest already.
Exactly, yeah. But I rarely venture outside anyway, so, I'm always stuck in here. I'm getting lots of stuff done. I'm working on lots of projects at once, probably too many at once, probably stretched a bit thin, but it's all going well. How's the non-fiction going, Mr. D? I've been meaning to ask.
It's a gathering process. I'm in that stage where, and I wish and this is a tip for anyone starting a big project, get your Scrivener file or whatever it is that you're going to create, get it set up before you start writing any notes. Because what I'm now doing is I spent so much time handwriting notes, recording things into my phone, having meetings with people and looking at transcripts, doing my own research. And there's just so much information. And I've suddenly said, right, I'm stopping it, drawing a line, and I'm going to put it all into Scrivener. So I'm basically, it's massive. It's looking like back to reality, Mark. Honestly, do you remember when we had all of those different files? So, but it's feeling so good to start putting things into order. And I know this is a big stage of the project, but I want to get everything. And it's kind of like, it's starting to kind of self-organize. I think you have to go through that process to really start to see
the shape of it.
Yeah, it's funny because it's really hard to sit at the beginning of the project, isn't it, and go, right, here's my outline. And you write. It doesn't really work like that because you have so many different ideas. And in some ways, a bit like, I've always learned this with fiction, that the theme of the book comes whilst you're writing the book, and you may only discover it at the end. I'm finding with a non-fiction project that's kind of a big series-based non-fiction with a core theme, that you're trying to work out what that first book's going to look like structure-wise. But the only way I can get to that is by gathering, and then it's almost like doing an edit and subtracting stuff from what I've got to say, right, what's the meat here? What's the stuff that can be put to one side or can be pushed to a later book or project? But fascinating, and I love it. I actually really like it. I've got my little writing spot now. Got my little space where I sit with a laptop, and it's feeling great.
Excellent. I tell you what, I mentioned a few weeks ago, you mentioned a scalpel. I've been working on a TV pitch for a TV series. It's been great. Do you like it? We're not sponsored by them or anything like that. This is a genuine recommendation. Yeah. Really, really good. Such a doddle to use as well.
It's so simple. That's what I love about it. It's like, you don't have to, you can get, it's good to watch a 20-minute video on it, but there's actually not that much to it in terms of,
but it's options. Really easy, really, really easy and instinctive to use. So,
and have you managed No worries. And have you managed to get it in? Have you played around with importing it into or connecting it with Scrivener as well? Because it automatically.
No, I can't say too much without giving it away, but it's just so that I could show to my creative partner the shape of a thing. And we could say, oh, okay, that's great.
So
and now
much
we're going
easier.
to.
Isn't visual so much easier than trying to explain something to someone?
Yeah, definitely.
Just laying something out and brilliant stuff. Excellent. Brilliant. Well, we have a humdinger and quite a long interview today, don't we? So come on, Mark. See if you can even start to summarize this interview.
I know I've probably said this a few times, but certainly I think it might be my favorite interview of the year. And I could sit and listen to Graham Hurley all day long, perhaps over a nice long lunch. We talk about publishing lunches amongst other things, but Graham Hurley is the author of, I think, 49 books and counting. He returns with his latest Second World War thriller, The Blood of Others. He talks about that. He also takes us through his extraordinary career, and it's a really entertaining chat. It's a bit sweary in places, so if you've got kids in the car with you or whatever, be warned. There's not excessively, but there's a few F-bombs in there. Also, full disclosure, I sold Graham's books when I was at Orion. So you're going to hear some names. One of them is Malcolm, who is Malcolm Edwards, who was the managing director of Orion Books and has this genius for spotting bestsellers. And also Simon Spanton, who edited my book, The End of Magic, but also at Orion, he worked at Gollancz, and he did occasionally edit crime books as well, and other outside of the genre books. Simon was the person who came down to me one day when I was working at Orion, gave me a manuscript and said, new author, J. Abercrombie, I think you'll like him. I was like, oh, really? Yes, so Simon came with that. So you're going to hear those names. We discuss, amongst many other things, we discuss something called soft linkage. We discuss how a writer who hates crime fiction ended up writing a successful crime series, and how Graham's writing career began while searching for the Titanic. Yes, really.
You have to wait for the end for that one, folks. So let's dive in and listen to the consummate storyteller. That is Graham Hurley, chatting with Mark.
Graham Hurley, welcome to the Bestseller Experiment. How are you today, sir?
Terrific. Absolutely brilliant. Enjoying the weather. Been for 2 swims. All good.
Brilliant. Fantastic. You've done more already. It's not even lunchtime than most people have done in a day. But we are here to talk about your incredible new book, The Blood of Others, which is the 8th book in a series chronicling the Second World War, and it has recurring characters. And I want to talk about that whole series in a minute. But this one is about the Dieppe raid in 1942, Operation Jubilee, which was a disaster. What was it about this event that made you think there was a novel in this? Tell us what drew you to this event.
Well, to some degree, I have to look back over the series. So we're talking books 1 to 7. Now, I'm not going to go through them, but by and large, each individual book covered a fair amount of time for various sort of plot reasons. And I'd always been fascinated by what they termed the Dieppe raid. It was an expedition. It was an away day essay in sustained violence. And it seemed to offer, and I first came across it when I was working in television. And I, for whatever reason, I'd acquired the responsibility and the challenge and everything else to do the big anniversary World War II documentaries for ITV. So you can imagine it starts with Dunkirk, it ends with D-Day, and we did both ends of the war. But in the middle of the war, there was this one little expedition on the 19th of August that, as you've just said, ended in complete catastrophe. And the reasons for that have always fascinated me. And what I wanted to do was to make a film about it. Now, that never came to pass because TVS, for whom I was working, they lost the franchise. But then I started this series of World War II based novels. And at the end of book 7, it occurred to me that the clever thing to do would be to go back and readdress that, or interfere with that itch that has never gone away to do something about Dieppe. And that's what I've done. The very tightness of the time frame, and obviously I expand it backwards and forwards to give you lots and lots of color, of context, of character, etc. But the core of the story is very sadly simplicity itself. and it revolves. What a witty title! In spilling of the blood of others.
Wonderful. It's what I love about this as well is when you're dealing with World War II novels, particularly military ones, there's a danger. It could be a whole bunch of exposition. It could be generals barking orders. But what I love about your books is they have this humanity to them. They're these wonderful characters. That reminds me. I remember reading people like Len Dayton and stuff like that, and that puts humans into the war like that. I mean, for example, in this we've got, and this isn't a spoiler. This is early on. There's a character called Schultz, and he's spying on French fortifications, but his cover is he's a bird watcher. But he really does love birds. He even does an impersonation of one of them. And suddenly he's not just a spy, he's a human being. Where are you finding those little details of character? Are you drawing them from history, or are you bringing them to the characters yourself?
Well, that's a very interesting question, Mark. And you all know, because you work for Orion and we have back history between us. And I've now done 49 books. And I have lost count of the number of characters I've invented, but I try very hard in terms of fictional characters to draw on the page people of, dare I say it, rare distinction. And that's no tribute to their moral qualities. That's just to make them different, the one to the other.
Yeah.
Now, what for me is very special about the challenge that this series, the Spoils of War series, or collection as we now call it, offers me as the writer, is the freedom to be able to mix real characters, some of the giants of the war and some of the not so gigantic figures in the war, but real people, with people that I've completely invented. Now, you mentioned Schultz. Schultz appeared has been there in the series from the start, and that is a tribute to Schultz. I mean, he's a representative of one of those up for it, ultra-violent Sturmabteilung Nazis, the brown shirts that bloodied the streets of Berlin in the 20s and the 30s, came to realize, probably sooner than most of the guys he was fighting with or against, that they were heading for dictatorship. And this was a Germany, a Reich, in the first place, a 1,000-year Reich that was being bossed by gangsters. And this wasn't, despite his background, this wasn't to his liking. And so he joins the Abwehr, the military intelligence organization, under a fascinating man, real guy, appears in the next book in depth, called Admiral Canaris. And the trick here is that these are, dare I say, old-style Germans. They have a conscience. They know the direction of travel. They've been on the Wilhelmstrasse. They've mixed in the top corridors. They understand the realities of the Nazi dung heap. And they know for sure that, dare I say, Germany, the new Germany, the 1,000-year Reich, is heading for big trouble. And that makes him, to me, a very interesting character, because he's lost none of his pugnacity, none of his appetite for a fight, but he's a thinking man.
It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Now, you mentioned this is an 8-book series. There are more to come. They are, as I understand it, they're non-chronological. They have recurring characters. How are you keeping track of this series, and is there a master plan?
Okay, this is going to be a slightly longer answer than you may be used to. And it's partly your fault, actually, because it was Orion who lured me into crime fiction. And I don't know whether you remember or not, but one of my hidden secrets as a writer is I can't stand crime fiction. I never read the stuff.
I want to come back to that later. I've got a question about that later, definitely.
Okay. And I did 16 of them because, I've got kids and they had to go to universities and I've got expenses and I've got to keep the fridge at least half full. And so manfully, I booked my bunk in the crime fiction Stalag and laboured on. But by the time I got to the end of book 16, I'd really had enough, and I thought if I have to write another police interview sequence, I'm going to go bonkers, and so I had to step out of that genre. And as you above all will know, for a moderately successful writer, in the end I made a success of it. There was a film series and all the rest of it, but that's not an easy ask. My agent the lovely Ollie Munson was absolutely appalled. He said, well, you can't leave crime fiction. And I said, Ollie, I'm going to leave crime fiction. And guess what? I've written, uncommissioned, big punt, a World War II book. And it's called Finisterre. And if you want to get into the background of that, I'm very happy to do that. However, the key thing is his reaction. And he said, absolutely no chance. You are in there for good. You get no pass. You get no spade for the tunnel. You're not going to leave the stalag. You're there forever. So I said, well, no, Ollie, it's this or nothing, mate. And we, you and I, have got to think outside the box. So here's my proposition. World War II, all 7 years, were the biggest crime scene in recorded history. So there are umpteen stories to tell. And I want you, if at all possible, to find me a like-minded publisher, which, God bless him, he did. And he came up with Head of Zeus, a lovely man called Nick Cheetham. Nick Cheetham is a fellow war buff. Never met him in my life. We had a lunch. It's quite a long lunch. Unknown to me, Ollie had slipped him a copy of Finisterre. He'd also slipped him a copy of the synopsis, which I was honour bound to offer in terms of a crime fiction thing. And Nick, bless him, said, no, you're not a non-fiction writer anymore. I'm going to turn you into a recent historical adventure writer. And we spent the rest of that wonderful, I mean, it shaped the rest of my life, those 2 hours. And we debated terms of engagement, rules of engagement. And his first question was, love the book. Who are we going to go with for the series? And I said, what do you mean go with? He said, well, we've got to have a lead character. And I said, a bit like Faraday in the 12-book Faraday series? And he said, yes, exactly. And I said, well, I'm not doing that anymore. And he says, you're not? I said, no. So what's your proposition? I said, well, my proposition is this, that I come up, or you give me the editorial freedoms to do 2 key things. The first is to be able, as I've described already, to mix the real and the fictional in scene after scene, after chapter after chapter, after book. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you give me the freedom, the liberty to dip into the war and dip out of the war in a non-chronological order as my whims take me. So when I stumble over, and this will happen, I guarantee, Nick, as the series lengthens and gets more and more successful, I'm going to be stumbling over untold stories. And he said, so you want those 2 freedoms? You don't want much, do you? He said, we don't. You obviously know that you don't sell books singly anymore. They've got to be in series, and that means recurring characters. And I said, well, I'm offering you recurring characters because I'm going to come up with a repertory company of maybe 6, maybe slightly more recurring characters, and as book follows book follows book, each of these guys will shoulder more or less of the narrative as the circumstances of the plot and the developing action demand. So that's the bid. So he looked at me and he said, how am I going to sell that to sales? Very good and very honest question. And I said, okay. He said, right, here's the deal. Where are you going now? And I said, I'm going to go to Waterloo. I'm going to get on a train. I'm going back to the West Country where we live. He said, fine, you've got until 9 o'clock to come up with a case that I can make to sales. So I'm sitting on the train, you can imagine this, and the train gets emptier and emptier, and we arrive finally at Crewkerne, 2 hours into the journey. And I've suddenly got it. I'm looking out, and I've got the phrase. And as you will know, you've been in publishing a long time. You've been around words a long time. I was in advertising for a very brief moment. And the key is that one sentence or that half sentence. And I go to the pub. I'm waiting for the next train, and I phone Nick, and he said, "Okay, tell me." He said, "I said, have you got a pen?" He said, "Yeah, I've got a memory as well." It's got to be brief. And I said, "Okay, here's the phrase: soft linkage." A long pause. I said, "What the fuck does that mean?" And I said, "Well, that's the beauty of the phrase. It means nothing, but it's seriously classy." He said, "You're on. We can go ahead." And that's how the series came to pass.
I think we just got the title of this episode, Soft Linkage. I love it. It's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And I love that you were so uncompromising as well. I think that particularly new authors, if they're new to the industry, they do as they're told. You're going to write this, you change this, blah, 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 set it here, yada, yada, yada. But I love how uncompromising you were. And well, look, let's talk about that change, because you did start as a thriller writer, but as you say, when you moved to Orion, you were cajoled to become a crime writer. What was that? What was that conversation like? Tell us about that change.
All right. Well, everything of any importance, as you know, Mark, in publishing happens over a lunch. And this was a very thinly attended lunch, which was not a good sign. There was a guy called Malcolm, who you'll remember.
Malcolm Edwards.
That's it, Malcolm Edwards, who was a lead honcho in the organisation. And there was a nice man called Simon, who was my editor. And
Simon Spanton.
Yeah, he doesn't work there.
I love Simon. He's edited one of my books. I'm a very lucky man. He's a great editor.
He's a clever guy. He's a gentleman.
Yes.
In so many respects. Anyway, so there we are. And I've sent in a proposal for the next 2-book contract in terms of what we called international thrillers. And it was spun round the Cowes to Ireland and then back to Plymouth yacht race. And it was a decent ride and so forth. And as you know as well, you tend not to talk business until the profita rolls around. There's a protocol here. So you have to hold in your impatience until the dessert course. And so the dessert course happens. And I said to Malcolm, who was the man who made the decision, I said, "Have you read the work?" He said, yeah. What do you think? Yeah, it's fine. I said, okay, great. Can we talk, money? And he said, no. I said, why's that? He said, we're not going to publish it. And I said, oh, is that right? Now, I had 11 books on the shelf by then. So you might say, well, just go to somewhere else. But as you know, above all, word gets round in this very incestuous business, and people will start saying, well, what's wrong with Hurley? Doesn't he deliver on time? Is he difficult? Can't you rely on him anymore? Is he too hard or whatever? None of those things are true, by the way. And I say so, and I'm eyeing this towering piles of profita rolls and thinking it's now the time to ask for the brown bag, and because this is what we got to survive on for the next year. So is this the end of the grand adventure? And I remember Malcolm saying, no, it's not. We have an invitation to extend. And the invitation is to write, is to join our little corner. And we've made this really successful corner in commercial fiction, and it's crime fiction, which is the fastest growing bit of the commercial fiction wood. And we've got a young Scottish writer we've just broken out, and his name is Ian Rankin. And we've got a stable of fantastic American writers like Mike Connolly and James Lee Burke, etc. So you'll be in distinguished companies. Now, we have noticed, Glenn, that we can't take you out of Portsmouth or Portsmouth out of you. And we think that what we'd like to do is for you to do a ranking on Portsmouth, or Pompey, as you call it.
Yeah.
And I said, all right, no pressure then. And he said, it won't be a 2-book contract, it'll be a 3-book contract. The money was dreadful. It was a third of what I started on. And I said, do I have any option here? He said, well, you have an option. You can leave us completely. And I said, all right, okay. How long do I have to make up my mind? And he said, you've got until the end of the week. And this was a Wednesday. So I said, okay, right. I'm sitting on the train going home, back to my lovely wife, Lynn. And I'm thinking, this is going to be a very big problem. Why? Because I can't stand crime fiction. I never read the stuff. I think it's repetitive. I think it does what a genre shouldn't do. It makes way for all too often bad writing, though there are some very, very good practitioners in the field. And, I'd be bound to a wheel I don't want to even glimpse. But I have no choice. So what do? 2 options. One, I had enough money to fence off about 5 weeks before I had to find a proper job. So that's research. I can either go to the 2nd floor of Pompey's magnificent central library, and there you will find the proof positive for Orion's faith in crime fiction. There are kilometres of bookshelves that carry nothing but crime fiction, and I can read 5 weeks worth, which will turn me into an automaton, and I'll end up writing really bad pastiche crime fiction. Or I could do what I did in television, and I'd spent 2 decades in TV making documentaries, and by far the most interesting thing in that exercise was research, was doing the novelist thing, was getting beside people and trying to work out what life was like for them. You clamber into their heads, you clamber into their hearts, and all the rest of it. And I had a huge stroke of luck. I've been blessed with good luck all my life. And a guy who turned out to love my fiction to date was the Pompey police chief. And he said, "No, you come along any time. I'll give you the basic course in police procedural, and then I'll put you in amongst the reptiles." Now, this should have been a health warning. And I said, "Reptiles?" His name was and is Hurley Dumont, and he was the top cop. And all the detectives loathed him. He'd been in uniform all his life. He was an honest man. Most of the cops weren't. And they hated him. They're in the relevant police station, which happens to be Kingston Crescent. There are two crime offices. One's really interesting, which is the major crime squad, and there's something called the volume crime team. Now you've got to imagine 16 really pissed off cops. They're sitting behind desks. They've joined up for fast car chases and serial killers. And mercifully, there are neither, or very few, in Pompey. And so they spend most of their paid time chasing feral kids from, blagged shops to blagged shops, low-level social nuisance, nicking cars, getting in people's faces. And these guys are catatonic. They loathe the job. They're also very, very good at handling what they term their enemies. And each of these guys carries a list, literally, of enemies, and it's categories of people you can imagine. It starts off with their line managers. These are the guys that sign their overtime forms. And then it goes to local politicians, home office politicians, home office civil servants, and then at the very top, anyone from the media. People like me who snuggle up in the next chair and say, "Well, Harry, what's it like for you," etc. And they saw me off completely. And I'd done over 100 documentaries by now. I'm good at research. I'm good at winning people's trust. Did it work? No. However, I had no option. And so I had to stop, and I had to look, and I had to listen. Above all, listen, and you begin to get your finger on the pulse of that office, and you begin to realize that seriously interesting things are happening underneath the surface, and they have mainly to do with people's private lives and people's wives and people's girlfriends, and how much most of those guys hate each other and what they got on each other. And I think this is really interesting. So what I'm going to do is make my little notes at the end of each day, and I'm going to write my first crime fiction thriller in the minor key. So at the end of my 5 weeks, I'm spent up. I go home. I go in the back bedroom. I put pen to paper. I base it on the synopsis I took to that original lunch about the yacht race. Because nothing is wasted in the writer's life.
Yes.
I send it off. Normally, I have to wait about, something like 10 days to get a response from Simon Spanton. On this occasion, 3 days later, the phone rings. It's Simon. He says, "We've never read anything like this before." And I said, "Oh, I wonder why that is." I said, "Well, why?" He said, "It just sounds so real." And I said, "Well, that's because I sat for 5 weeks and blah, blah, blah." Anyway, they loved it, absolutely loved it. And as you may or may not know, and there were very, very little work to do on the manuscript, and it went out in the year 2000. And again, as you know, every published author gets 10 hardbacks. And this is where I was very clever. I took 7 of those hardbacks, and I tottered back to the Kingston Crescent police station. I went back to the volume crime office, and I have an armful of books, and heads looked up around the room. And I said, all right, guys, I'm not staying. I'm not going to bug you. I'm not going to your hair. This is what it's all about. And I just distributed them. Now, why did I do that? Because cops, uniformed, CID are monumentally mean. They never put their hands in their pockets. They would never buy this thing. And so I said, see what you make of it, guys. And I went home. And about, 4 or 5 days later, the phone begins to ring. And it's cop after cop after cop. And of course, the story is obvious. And they're saying, look, Graham, no offense, mate, we got you wrong. We didn't know what you were going to make of us. You could have made anything of us. We're used to people from television, especially. And they just never listen. They never get it right. Just watch any drama. It's all fucking wrong. However, you did, for whatever reason, you got it right, mate. And I tell you what, I'm speaking for my mates and me. Anytime you want to meet us in a pub, as long as you're in the chair, we'll all be there and we'll tell you anything. And they're as good as their word. And I ended up with the longest contacts book, list of disaffected detectives in Portsmouth that anyone can imagine. And then there's a little codicil, there's a little PS to this story. And some time had gone by, and the phone rang again, and I picked it up, and it was a voice that I didn't recognise. And I said, the voice said, are you Graham Hurley? I said, yes, I am. And I said, who are you? And he wouldn't tell me to begin with. And I said, well, I'm not going to talk to you until you give me your name. He said, well, my name is Colin. I said, oh, hello, Colin. How can I help you? He said, we, life's all pronouns, we have read your book. I said, well, who are you? He said, I'm Assistant Chief Constable for CID and Special Operations. Now, my book, because it was honest, because it reflected life, everyone in paid employment, whether they work in publishing, the police, television, spend a lot of their paid time bitching about the bosses. And believe me, detectives are no different. And did the book reflect that? In spades. Why? Because the guys on the top floor in police headquarters in Winchester hadn't got a clue what goes on the street. So I'm talking to my new friend Colin, and I say, well, what do you think of the book? And he won't tell me. So he said, once again, we have an invitation to extend. And I thought, oh no, attend a police station of your choice, bring your driving license and your dog. And he said, no. We've noticed that you're dealing only with volume crime, in other words, crap crime. We want you to run with the major crimes team. We've got 4 of them, as you know. One of them Southeast Hampshire, and it's the busiest, and it's based in Portsmouth. The next time we get a decent murder, we like you to be our guest. Is that okay? So I said, yeah, it's fine. You've got any questions? I said, just one. He said, what's that? I said, what's a decent murder? And he said, well, a decent murder, it used to be the bloke comes back on Friday. He comes from the pub. The meal's been on the table in the kitchen for 3 hours. It's gone cold. He's pissed as a rat. And there's a huge domestic. And he ends up killing his wife. These days, it's more likely that the wife kills the husband because she's sober. And believe me, women take no prisoners anymore. But the first thing the woman does is to lift the phone and call us. So that gives you, Graham, maybe a paragraph, maybe a couple of sentences. But we want something with legs, something that's going to run and run. In other words, a decent murder. Now, Pompey, in all kinds of respects, has never let me down. This was Christmas. Just after Christmas, it's snowing. It's 3:00 in the morning. I'm in bed with my wife, and there's this thunderous noise on the front door. And I go down, I open the door, and the snow is falling out of the darkness. And there's this huge uniformed cop there. And he says, are you Graham Hurley? I said, yeah. He says, there's been a murder. I said, well, mate, my alibi's upstairs. She's in bed. Do you want me to get... No, mate. I've been asked to get... Look, go upstairs, get yourself changed. I'm going to drive you north. And that's what he did. And we went to some woodland on the mainland near a place called Wickham. And a guy earlier in the day, in the afternoon, had been walking his dog. And there in a shallow grave had been the body of a low-level drug runner from North End, which is an area of Pompey. And that was the beginning of Operation Rankin, funnily enough. and they were as good as their word. Now, investigating major crimes is meetings, big time, meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. They go on for weeks, in this case months. And for the first 2 months, I attended every single one, and it completely changed my take on the police, and it laid the foundations for everything that followed in that series. It was no less authentic, probably even more authentic than the first book, but because it was dealing at depth and in depth with the workings of the major crime machine, and it is a machine, I had this amazingly privileged insight into the way they do it. I mean, life in Pompey then and now is no. Whereabouts do you live, Mark?
I'm in Kent, North Kent. I used to go to Portsmouth a lot. Sorry,
is it anywhere near Chatham?
I'm about 45 minutes from Chatham.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
But you will know that you know, if some oik middle of the night pissed out of his head kicks your wing mirror off, there's no point even lifting the phone. If, on the other hand, you know, your loved one or your whoever gets killed, then you'll get fantastic service from the police, and that's true wherever you might be. So that was the stroke of luck, and that actually transformed my prospects. And I began, in the end, I wrote 12 cry-fires, as we now call them, based around Joe Faraday in Pompey. And I really enjoyed it. And that's because I think they were a bit different. They were a sort of slice of social history, if you like. And I've always subscribed to the theory, and it was Simon's theory to begin with, Simon Spanton, my editor, you know, that Pompey, and he knew Pompey a lot because he used to come and stay, and he was horrified by Pompey. You know, he was a Suffolk boy. And and he said, you know, Portsmouth is based on an island, and that's true, it is. And it's the UK writ small. So everything you see and you record in your books through the eyes of Faraday happening in Pompey will happen in the end everywhere in this country. And you know, it's turned out to be exactly true. Exactly true. I hold my head high now.
I don't know where to start with that. There's so much to discuss. I used to go to Portsmouth a lot when I was a sales rep for Headline. I used to go to the Otakers in Portsmouth. And I remember driving in, and I'd always see two rusty submarines sort of leaning against each other.
Yes, that's right.
It's like,
that's the Harry Pound scrapyard.
Right, okay. I always wonder what they were. It's like, is that just where the Royal Navy dumps submarines when they're done with them? What's the story there? But yeah, it is a you're absolutely right. It's all of the UK sort of compressed into one place. But what I love is that the fact that you are not a crime fan gave you this unique perspective on the genre, and therefore you brought something completely different to it, which is just fascinating to me, absolutely fascinating to me. As you said, you did all of these Joe Faraday books, and then you did the Jimmy Suttle series, which moved the action to East Devon, which is very different to Portsmouth. And I imagine that there aren't as many brutal murders in East Devon, are there? I mean, that was a bit of a challenge, wasn't it?
It was very challenging to try and sell the concept. I invite you to another lunch at the end of the Faraday series. By now, it's become, you know, a success. It's gone into 6-7 languages. The French have started to make these 7 feature film length adaptations, which they did magnificently. You know, it's acquired a big readership both in this country and abroad. And therefore, there are many, many more faces around the table. And we don't even wait for the profiterole rolls. And then, again, it's Malcolm saying, well, Graham, share with us your ideas for books 13, 14 and 15. And I said, well, okay, guys, I've got some bad news, or maybe bad news, but there will be no more Faraday books. And there's a sort of silence around the table. And Malcolm says, why? And I said, well, the USP for the series is their authenticity. At the point when I started the series 12 years ago, I was 42. I made my lead cops, Faraday and Winter, 42. They've now aged. They're now 54. And in real time, cop time, they'd be retiring. So, no spoilers, but something not good has happened to Faraday. And he says, well, we can get over that. Don't worry about that. I said, you're right. Absolutely right, Malcolm. And this is how we're going to do it. There's a younger cop called Jimmy Suttle. And he's a DS. He's only 32. That's the good news. There's lots of shelf life in Jimmy Suttle. I'm going to kidnap him and bring him down to where we now live. And Malcolm says, well, where do you now live? And I said, as you just said, East Devon. And there's this terrible silence around the table. And people are looking at each other. And then Malcolm picks up the running and he says, Graham, East Devon. I said, yeah. Have you any idea what's happening year on year, month by month, week on week to English crime fiction? It's getting more violent. It's getting more metropolitan. It's getting more noir. And it's getting ever less compromising. And you're trying to sell us a series set in leafy East Devon? I said, yeah. What's it like down there? I said, it's fantastic. I rest my case, he said. No chance at all. I do my best to sell, fail completely. However, the fridge is now full, thanks to the French. And I get back on the train, I go home, and I'm a happy bunny. And I hear nothing from Orion for about 5 months. And by this time, Lynn and I have been in Exmouth for 2 years. And then the phone goes, and it's Orion, and it's Simon. And Simon says, look, we've had a no-show. In fact, someone's died who's yet to deliver for next spring's list. And so we've got a bit of a hole. You know that proposition about East Devon and Jimmy Sutton? I said, yeah. He said, I think you're wrong. I said, oh, that's great. No problem at all. So he said, that's the good news. The bad news is it's now late October. We need it by Christmas. I said, no problem at all. You know, I do write very quickly, but I write on the basis of research. Never, ever write what you haven't researched out. So we agree that we'll do the book, and we agree in financial terms, and it's all good. Down goes the firm. I think, Christ, what am I going to do? Now, the only thing I really know about Exmouth is the rowing club, because Lynn and I have both joined the rowing club. We've been mad about the sea all our lives. We swim, we sail, we do this, that, and the other, and we joined the rowing club. So I'm thinking, okay, so I can base it around the rowing club. What do I do for a plot? And now, Agatha Christie used to live down the coast, and her big house overlooking the River Dart, Greenways, is just a bus ride away. So I think what I'll do is to take the classical English country house murder, and I'll restage it afloat. We row 4 scull plus cocks French boats. They're called sculls. And broadly, the plot will be one guy dies, one of the other 4 did it. Think on. But, as you know, above all else, 2 things matter in the book. Number 1's the cover, but number 2 is the first page. You've got to have a real blaster of an opening. And I hadn't got an opening. And I figured out the rest of the plot over the days that came. And then the weekend turned up. And the weekend, we all go down for our row on Sundays, and we're wearing all the kit and the red T-shirt, etc. And I'm standing there, and all our boats are on the beach. And this fit-looking guy comes up, and he says, are you anything to do with the rowing club? And it's right over my chest. I said, yeah, well done. Yes, I am. How can I help you? He said, well, can anyone join? I said, yeah, but you've got to know something about rowing. He said, well, I know a bit, not very much. So I said, okay, patronising as you like. I said, I'll take you up to the clubhouse. I'll put you on a rowing machine, see how good you are. And then if there's any hope at all, I'll bring you back to the beach. We'll pop you in the boat, 3 experienced rowers, experienced cocks, take you for a trip around the bay, see how you do. How's that? He said, yeah, that's fine. So we're going up towards the boathouse. And I say, precautionary question, how much experience have we really got? And he said, well, last year I rowed the Atlantic. And I thought, oh dear, help. I think we'll skip the rowing machine. So we turn around, we put him in a boat. He taught us all about rowing. That was good. He didn't, in the end, join the club. But what we did do is we got together as friends, and I oiled the friendship with lots of beer. And I got him to tell me about his crossing the Atlantic, unusually west to east. And he did it with another guy. And it gave me everything in terms of that that coincidental detail, those little tiny 2 per paragraph touches that liven up a text and convince you, the reader, and me, the reader, that whoever you're listening to has walked the course, and so that was a huge stroke of luck, and that launched the first in what became a quartet, and after that it was Spoils of War.
Fantastic. I want to go back to the North Atlantic for a minute, because as I understand it, and this is going back to before you were published, you were a documentary maker, and am I right in thinking that you came up with an idea, I think, was it Rules of Engagement, when you were in the North Atlantic looking for the Titanic?
Correct. Absolutely.
Tell us more.
Well, I was working for TVS. I started working for Southern. Southern lost the franchise. TVS came along. And this is a world of television that's now disappeared. So there are very, very few buttons on your set. Basically, there are, by the time we're in the mid-'80s, there are only 4. So there's very little competition for advertising, which meant that we had big production budgets. In other words, we could take a risk or two with really big projects. And TVS, to their great credit, because the Titanic sailed in April 1912 from Southampton on her first and final voyage, as it turned out, and they knew that a guy, an American East Coast oceanographer called Bob Ballard, was heading up an expedition to find the Titanic and then to send down submersibles and remote cameras, etc., and film it. And TVS bid for the rights to make the documentary. Cost them a fortune. Asked me to do it. Long story short, I'd turn up in Cape Cod, Woods Hole, get on a converted hull trawler, and forge out into the North Atlantic, where we're going to find, hopefully, the Titanic. And the boat is the key to this. And in the shape of the skipper, whose name was John Nicol, and he was a lovely man. And he and I shared a passion for books, and he had a cabin, obviously, slightly bigger than the rest of the cabins, and wherever you looked, there were books and books and books, and we buddied up. We spent a lot of time together, and we'd retire to his cabin after supper, and we'd sink a few beers, and I shared with him my still passion at some point to somehow get into print with a novel. And by this time I'd written 9 mercifully unpublished novels. They were not great work, but I'd served my apprenticeship, and we arrived at what we called the search box, which was a sort of 10 mile by 5 mile patch of ocean, beneath which somewhere down there was the Titanic. And we began to tow this black and white camera up and down and up and down and up and down, searching for 46,000 tons of missing liner. And you think that'd be an easy ask, and it wasn't. And it was also incredibly boring. So you're sitting there day after day watching. I don't know if you've ever seen the bottom of the Atlantic 2.5 miles down, but it looks like the arse end of the moon. There is nothing down there, least of all, And so we're going on and on and on. And then, and I'm talking to John, and we've bonded, etc. And I've shared with him my dreams. And he said, "Look, listen, we're not finding this boat, so why don't you borrow the radio room? I've got a typewriter. Do something to hasten your bid to get into print." And so I said, "Well, good idea." And I got someone else to watch the monitor the following day, and I did a synopsis for a 6-part TV drama, partly because I knew the head of our TV drama quite well. So I did it all, and I showed it to John Nicol that night, and it was called Rules of Engagement. And I won't bother you with the plot, but it was a sort of Cold War plot. And he said, "This is great. Get on the radio tomorrow. I've got a fax machine. You can fax it to your mate and see how we go." Now, the following week, and it was a Wednesday, and it was raining, 2 things happened. In the morning, I'm sitting comatose as ever, gazing at this screen. And for the first time in 3 weeks, something man-made wobbles into view, goes in and out of focus, and then disappears. I'm not quite sure. It looked like a champagne bucket. I wasn't sure. And then there's more of nothing. And then I see a deck chair. a deck chair. And then about a minute later, the clinching evidence, and it's a life belt. It's upside down, but I'm really good at reading upside down. And it says RMS Titanic on it. Now, that's a clue in our trade. Hey.
You think?
Yeah. So, okay, we've now found the Titanic, and it turned out to be in two bits. There's a long aft section, and there's a shorter 1/3 bow section, and there's the debris field, which is what we strayed across in the middle, and this is the business, and now the real work can begin. However, that afternoon, I got a fax from London from my mate in ITV saying that they'd read the 6-episode proposal and they really loved it, and I'm on. Now, all that happened in one day, and looking back, I have to say, which of those two events shaped the rest of your life? And the answer has to be that phone call. Because, it's led to me getting to print. First thing I did when we got back with all our rushes and so forth was to find myself an agent. She found within a day and a half Pan Macmillan. I was on for the novelisation of Rules of Engagement, and we were off. And that's where the real adventure, what I wanted to do all my waking life, probably sleeping life too, began.
That is phenomenal. Graham, we're running out of time. I'd love you to come back one day and we'll pick it up from there and go from there, because there's still so much to talk about. But
I've not gone too long.
Not at all. This has been absolute joy. It's made my day. But yeah, we've got so much more to talk about, I think. But folks, listen, The Blood of Others is out there. I think this episode is coming out about a month before Christmas. It's the ideal Christmas gift, as well as 7 others of them. So treat yourselves, folks. And also, a whole ton of, what was it? You said 49 books. So lucky dip, pick a handful. You're not going to be disappointed. Graham, it's been an absolute treat speaking to you today. And yeah, we definitely need to get you back on, and we'll speak to you again soon.
Okay. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book, quitting the day job, becoming a best-selling author? Well, over 4 years, we've studied the advice of over 300 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 500 million books. And we are excited to announce the Bestseller Academy. If you're ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, and coaching, your bestseller dreams are now only a click away. To find out more and apply, visit bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. Wow. I mean,
yeah.
I've got to say, that's a first, Mark, isn't it? An author looking for the Titanic. I can't remember anyone on the show that's done that in 7 years. Like, what? It's amazing, isn't it? We can keep interviewing authors, but there's always some incredible stories. But the thing I loved about Graham is, I mean, if his books are anything like the way he talks, he is just, you can imagine sitting with him and at a pub the whole day just telling stories, because he is absolutely the consummate storyteller.
And his books are like that. If you just heard what you liked, then you're going to like Graham's books, and you got plenty to choose from. So yeah, do dip in. But yeah, it's such a great chat.
We have to start somewhere as well, and we have to start somewhere. But for me, the thing that I cannot believe this, last week we had someone saying, "Don't buy my book." That was a first. Yeah. And this time we've got someone being told that they need to write a crime novel, and they can't stand crime. And yet, we talked about this last week, didn't we? About the saying yes and going with it and seeing what happens. Yeah. But what an incredible story that he found a way to write crime using the things that he loves, and then became really successful with it as well.
I mean, I don't want to speak for Graham, but basically when he says he hates crime, I think he hates the tropes of crime and the cliches of crime. Yeah. And to get over that, he is a documentarian. Rather than going for the genre, for the easy thing, the thing that crops up again and again, he went for the reality. He went to speak to the cops and got to know them and earned their trust, and did his due diligence and got all those, I mean, last week with Fiona, she was talking about those little details that make all the difference. And it's the same thing here with Graham. You know, he was talking about that there. So all those touches that make a difference. And then what I thought was important was he rewarded them with copies of his book to say, look, this is where it all ends up, you know. And the cops are all really tight and wouldn't have bought it, so you give them a free copy, just to say, look, this is how it ends up. So yeah, I think that having that kind of healthy disregard, not for the genre, but maybe for the tropes of the genre. If you've seen, you know, if you romance or fantasy or whatever genre you're writing in, if you look at it and think, oh gosh, it's just the same old again and again and again, that's probably a really good place to start. Because I mean, I mentioned Joe Abercrombie earlier. Joe was looking at the same old in fantasy, but thought, actually, I'm going to do things a bit differently. I'm going to make these characters feel a bit more real, which is where we get this grimdark thing. I mean, arguably it started with George R.R. Martin, putting a new spin on something that hasn't been done before. It's a risk, because publishers will go, maybe we don't know how to sell this. Or some of them will go, thank God you're here. This is exactly what we need to give the genre a shot in the arm. So if you're looking at a genre and you're thinking, do I fit in here because I'm not doing what the bestsellers are doing? No, don't worry about that. If you've got a unique take on it, it could be the best thing ever.
Wow. It's just incredible, isn't it? Absolutely incredible. Now, he also talked about, I was thinking about method actors here in this interview. And I was thinking, who are the top 10 method actors? And this is Wikipedia. So we've got Daniel Day-Lewis, Marlon Brando, Heath Ledger, Christian Bale, Jared Leto, Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, the list goes on. Now, we've never talked about this, but we hear a lot of authors who go way above and beyond the call of duty, so to speak, to really get in to the lives and the minds and experiences of the people they're writing about. And Graham is definitely in our top 10 of what I'd call method writers. And I think, isn't it incredible that, like, the stories about him spending, weeks in the police station, and then the story he mentioned about the dedication of, like, middle of the night being literally all in. That's some guy banging on the door at 3 a.m. saying, right, there's been a murder. And then he goes off to the woods. I mean, absolutely mental.
But that's the documentarian.
It is.
That's the person who says, okay, I'm not going to rely on someone getting back to me on it. I need to be there on the ground.
I need to experience it firsthand. Yeah. And
yeah.
I wonder if documentary making is a brilliant kind of education, if you like, for someone who really wants to write those kind of books where they really get under the skin of not just the people in your book, but everything around it as well. I mean, you think about how complex the police procedurals are, the worlds that they live in, and the mindset and the things they have to deal with. There's so much to that. And he went straight in to the middle of it and experienced it, which is, I guess, the next best thing to actually being that cop and having lived that life, right?
Yeah, and each of these professions, especially, they present a facade. The police will say, okay, we are the guardians. We are the people who keep the law. But of course, behind that, and we kind of know that it's fairly chaotic and difficult, and it has terrible, takes a terrible toll on anyone who's a cop or does that kind of thin blue line kind of thing. But then go beyond that and keep digging until you get something you might not have found before. And that's your angle. That's the thing because documentarians, yes, you could say to them, okay, do a documentary on police corruption or, cops who are unhappy or whatever. And you can reach for the easy cliches, or you can dig and dig and dig until you find something new. And I think that's what Graham does so well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we have to talk about this incredible story of him looking for the Titanic. And it was so vivid how he told it. I had a sense of him sitting there looking at this sonar look, and he talked about this deck chair and a bell floating past. But isn't it incredible that during that experience of, like, that long drawn out process of making that documentary, he decides that he's going to start writing a pitch for something completely irrelevant. I mean, sometimes it's almost like not sleight of hand, but it's the thing that we think we're meant to be doing is actually just the reason or the excuse to get us somewhere to do the other thing. And this is a really good example of that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, we think we might have a calling in life, or we think that there is something that is monumentally important in life, but Discovery of the Titanic, Bob Ballard, all of that was an astonishing. I was completely hooked by it. I got the books and everything. It was amazing. But we're all the hero of our own story, I guess. And Graham suddenly had all this downtime, I guess, on this ship where there's a lot of hurry up and wait, and a lot of wait and wait and wait. So how do you fill the time? You fill the time by doing something that, fills your cup. And for him, it was coming up with an idea for a show that kicked off his fiction and TV writing career. So I think sometimes we can find ourselves, if we've done something for so long, we kind of think, well, this is it, isn't it? And it's not. I think, and whatever your age, you can
reinvent yourself.
Absolutely.
With a thought. That is what it is. Yeah. You hear this so many times, don't you? But
our kids' generation, they're going to be the generation who have 7 or 8 jobs, and can have that complete midlife pivot. With us, I think we need to look ahead and kind of think, okay, I'm in my 50s now, but is it too late to change and do this? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. You can totally make that change.
Yeah, exactly. I think as well, it was an interesting story in that it wasn't just the combination of being on that ship and just like time passing and being, just really bored and not really knowing what to do, but it was that conversation that he had. It was the meeting of a like-minded individual, and they would chat at night, and it was almost like that conversation that he had inspired him to do it. And I think that it's a location thing, but it's also about the people that we meet. And sometimes all it takes, and we can probably all think back to someone in our life who once said one thing to us or one conversation that was that thing that pivoted us or made us think, you know what, I should really go for this. I should do this. And so sometimes it's about putting ourselves in places where we might meet those people, because that's the thing. We talked last week about going to the location to learn about the location so that we could write about it. But sometimes, especially when it comes to people, at the same time last week we talked about how Fiona met this woman on a walk and she could have just walked past her, but they actually ended up chatting. And so sometimes it's about being open to those chance encounters happening, going to your local. This is why we encourage writers. A lot of us work from home now. Go to your local library, go to your local coffee shop, be around people, write, but be around people, because those people might have a really important part to play in your story. They might be an inspiration for a character. They might be a publisher who happens to find out you're an author and ends up publishing your book, a filmmaker. So many different combinations of things could happen. But we have to get out there, and we have to also, like you say, get used to having conversations with people again, because I think we're all a little bit out of practice with that. With COVID, we've all become a little bit insular. People aren't visiting people as much as they used to. I don't know if you've noticed that, but invites and going in, and we don't invite people around as much as we used to. We've all shrunk a bit in our lives, and I think we have to start opening up a bit more, especially as authors, because that's where things like this can happen, that we saw happen with Graham, which is, like you said, he did say, didn't he? It was the thing he'd always wanted to happen. He'd been dreaming of happening, and it happened whilst he was looking for the Titanic, which is
finding the Titanic is the second most important thing that happened to you that day. It's fantastic.
Great line. I love it. That's a good T-shirt. Oh, brilliant stuff, folks. And he also mentioned very quickly in passing this idea that the cover and the first page are the most important parts of a book. Now, he kind of glossed over it, but I just wanted to jump on that. We spotted it because it's an important reminder. We can't hear this enough. Obviously, the cover, we talked about people like redoing their covers, the books like suddenly getting a new lease of life. But the first page is something we do in the academy as well. We have a course, don't we, on writing that first page and giving that first page to people to say, would you read this? Does it grab you? Is it knock? Because, if there's one page, you're going to have to work and work and rework and work. And I know people that go to bookshops, they pick up books and they read the opening line. And if the opening line doesn't grab it, they put it back on the shelf. So the cover test is, I like the cover. And then the next test to buy the book is, does the opening line or paragraph grab me? So I think a lot of people don't pay enough attention to that. I think, I'll just ease into the story, set the scene. You've got to knock it out of the park, like Graham said. I mean,
what was he saying? A real blaster of an opening. So
and actually, if you want a good example of that, and this isn't to kind of like promote our own book, but we had discussions. We did, didn't we, Mark? We had discussions about that opening page, and we wanted something like that first page of Back to Reality. It is crazy. It's all happening. But we had to kind of get to that place. That wasn't the initial starting point of the book. We wrote that first page, I think, when we were quite a ways through the book, if I remember right.
Yeah, I've done the same thing. The 5th Woodville book that I'm working on now. The opening chapter now isn't what the opening chapter was to start with, and it was around about the 5th chapter. But I thought, actually, this is a bit of a move. I can put this, and it's a rollicking opening. It's a real shocker.
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, this is it. And once that was in place, it's like the keystone of a bridge. It's like, okay, I can put everything else in place now. I feel like I've got a really good foundation to mix my metaphors.
I think it's great, though. I think so. The important thing to remember there is that you don't have to write the opening first page when you start your book. That usually happens. I mean, honestly, I would probably do that. I would keep redoing it, but then, review it at the end of the book and then start really working on it to make it as good as it can be. But can't stress that enough. And if you're interested in that, I mean, the course in the Academy is a really eye-opening as well in terms of, an actual process for doing that and how you really do need to go out there and ask people for feedback on it. Do your market research before you publish that book. And there's a lot of people thinking, I wish I'd done that before I published my book now. But, like we talked about last week, you can put your book, you can get if it's an ebook, you can update that front page, people do that all the time. So think about how that might change things for you. So folks, if you'd like to join us in the extended, we're going to cover the importance of publisher lunches. We're going to be also talking about soft linkage, which came up in the interview. Mark's going to deep dive us on research tips. So if you're interested in any of those, or if you just want to support the podcast, because that's what this is all about. If you support this podcast, we can keep this podcast on the road. So pop along to bestsellerexperiment.com/support. Sign up to become a patron of the podcast and get all these extra goodies. Welcome, folks, to the extended edition of this podcast. And Mark, I'm sure you've been there, but publisher lunches came up quite a few times in Graham's interview. In fact, profiteroles specifically came up a lot.
Yes, you don't talk business until the profiteroles turn up.
I saw in my head, I saw this waiter coming along with this tray, and it's like this mountain, literally like pyramid sized, and that was dessert for the two of them. It's I must say I do like a profiterole though. They are one of my favorite. They're like the ball version of an eclair that has been chopped up, because eclairs are my favorite, but profiteroles are like the kind of like
profiteroles.
They're so easy to eat though, aren't they?
Really, the definition
they're
of
so
Moorish.
light.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, let's put this into some sort of historical context, because Graham's talking about, I think it was the early 2000s, and I think the 80s and 90s were kind of the era of the boozy publishing lunch, where editors, naming no names, would go to lunch and you wouldn't see them again for the rest of the day.
You'd see them with a hangover the following morning, probably.
Yeah. Through the 2000s, when I was sort of working and publishing, there was still some of that going on, and I was invited to it. And I don't drink, so it was a very eye-opening experience. You go along to a few of these, but it was all part of the business of doing business. Is the agents would get to know the publishers would let their guard down a bit. The authors didn't feel the pressure of a meeting environment where they kind of had to be on or perform. And it's where ideas would be generated. People would go, that's a great, we should do that. That's which when you're having a boozy lunch, the cold light of day the next day, I might be, oh God, what did I agree to? Kind of thing. But you just
what napkin did I sign?
Exactly, yeah. But you see Graham's career pivoted on some of these amazing lunches where he had the train journey home to think about it, or a week or so to think about it. But it still goes on now. If I'm up in London and I meet up with my agent or whatever, we will have a kind of state of the nation where we'll talk about, okay, this is going well, that's going well, what's in the future. He'll give me ideas of what people are looking for, all that kind of thing. So it is it's still useful, just doesn't last all afternoon and end up with a massive hangover at the end of it. But it's kind of the social aspect of working in publishing. And I mean, I guess you get this with other industries, software, maybe, definitely the music industry, film industry has it, but publishing does have a reputation for those long lunches.
Well, I was thinking golf course, right? It's like it's the equivalent. It's the golf course equivalent. That's where all the kind of corporate execs, they'll go and play golf, but lunches. Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's anything, I think as well, because there's a lot of journalistic background in publishing as well. And I think journalists would always take people out to lunch, interview them.
Of course, the other thing is the locations, because we're based right sort of between Soho and the West End. And Orion House, you stepped outside, and there's the Ivy. It's right there. And within 5 minutes walking distance, 30 restaurants. Good ones, really, really good ones as well.
So the Ivy, is that some well-known pub in the publishing world?
The Ivy is kind of a celeb restaurant where people would go to be seen. But also, I mean, it's become kind of synonymous with publishing. Like if you go to the London Book Fair, at the Olympia, they have a pop-up Ivy. They move the Ivy to the book fair.
That's hilarious.
And people have launches there and stuff like that. So, and it's one of those restaurants. It's quite pricey, but I've been to a few kind of fancy lunches there. But then Hachette moved to Blackfriars on the Victoria Embankment in London. There's nothing. There's like one Italian restaurant, and it's like there's no restaurants near. It's almost like they did it on purpose to save on the expenses.
Is that the one I visited you at when I was in London all those years ago? Right, I know it well. Yeah. So that's the one that has all of the authors written down the stairwells, including yourself, Mr. Stay.
Yeah, I'm down by the toilets.
Down by the toilets, that's funny. Wow. It's an impressive building, though. I tell you what, when I walked in there, I thought, wow, this is proper. This is proper big publishing company. Just as you imagine it, like big entrance hall, lifts, glass everywhere. Quite modern, actually. I felt
so expensive that to make people redundant, but
Well, that's the thing, though. But I look at that, and I think, my gosh, how on earth can you pay for something like this building? Because that's where all the royalties that's paid by every word an author has written, really, when you think about it. Every brick in that building is a page of somebody's best-selling novel. Yeah. And every pane of glass is every whatever. I mean, it's fascinating, though, that these companies can still exist. I mean, I did this big venture in real estate and in property in the UK, like in the early internet days. And it was all based around the fact that I didn't think that real, estate agents or realtors would be able to afford high street presence anymore, because it's the cost of the bricks and mortar with something like the internet coming along. I mean, Amazon's kind of proved that in many different industries, unfortunately, in some cases, but it's a testament to the longevity of the industry and also the tradition of the industry that these big publishing houses still exist as well. But long may the lunches continue, and the profiteroles keep going. Now, Graham mentioned about soft linkage, and I must say, when he said it, I was like, what?
Well, he did make it up. He has invented the term, but it's an interesting approach to writing a series. And as he said, again, this is an interview you're going to have to listen to 2 or 3 times just to pick everything up. He just said, oh yeah, of course, if you want to make money, you have to write a series. And he's kind of right. I mean, obviously we have exceptions to that. People like Mark Edwards, Linwood Barclay, people like that, you do very well without a series. But it increases the odds of success, I think, if you write a series. But what if he'd already done a couple of crime series where characters age out of their role and that kind of thing. And of course, he wanted to hop, skip and jump all over the Second World War. So he came up with this thing of soft linkage, where he builds up this kind of ensemble of characters who can, pop in and out of books. And there's no one lead. I mean, the lead character, I guess, is the war. That's the arc that gets followed. And in a strange way, we're all kind of familiar with that, particularly if you're a fan of that genre, the wartime thriller. You'll know that if he writes a book about, as he has just done, the Dieppe raid in 1942, you go, oh yeah, I know about that. That was a bit of a disaster, wasn't it? Okay, let's get into that. So he know. I think as well, he's writing for himself finally, having written crime novels which he doesn't like. He's thinking, this is the kind of series I want to read, and clearly other people want to read it as well. Now, what's interesting, when he was talking to his new publisher, Nick Cheetham, who I know a bit, Nick's first question was, well, how do we sell this to sales? Which is how he came up with the term soft linkage. So I think once you can explain the concept to the salespeople and the marketing people, then they're thinking, okay, great, that's how I sell it to the retailers and to the general public. So I think it's all very well saying, oh, I'm not going to do the normal thing, but I think the onus is on you as the author to say, but here's the pitch, here's how you can pitch this to readers.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating stuff. It's really, really good. Now let's talk about, as we did prior to the extended, this idea of this on-the-job research or method writing. And you've done a lot of this, Mark, as well, and it's part of your whole writing process, isn't it? So what kind of tips have you got for people who are thinking about kind of, diving into their research for the book?
Yeah, well, let's just do a few fundamentals. I don't want to go too deep on this, but let's just first of all, the big question is, do you do your research before the first draft or after the first draft or during the first draft? And it's kind of a little, for me, it's a little of all. I remember when we had Ian Rankin famously on this podcast, he said he does all his research after the first draft, because then he just has to look up the things that he needs to fill the gaps in his story, which I think is a brilliant piece of advice. But of course, Ian is very well versed in crime fiction, thriller fiction. He knows that character and that world very, very well. He's immersed in it. So if you're coming to your debut novel, or you're writing in a precinct or a genre that might be unfamiliar to you, if you're writing your first crime novel, or you're writing your first fantasy novel or first historical novel or whatever, particularly historical stuff, it does pay to do a bit of research beforehand. So I've got a shelf up there of books on the Second World War and all sorts of the home front and all sorts of aspects. I did enough to be able to ask intelligent questions. So I didn't, because the danger is, if you want to write a book on the Roman Empire, well, good luck reading everything about that. You see sort of, 10 tips for research. Read everything about your subject. Really? Okay, fine. You want to read everything on the Roman Empire. Good luck with that. Fill your boots. Maybe just read enough to be able to ask intelligent questions, to be able to go, okay, well, I know this, this, and this, but what happened here? What's the thing that, what's never been done before, that kind of thing. So yes, read, do enough research, make some notes, get the ball rolling, get that momentum going. And the pro of that is you start writing your first draft with just enough knowledge in place to be able to write with a bit of confidence. And then you may come across stuff, as I have, in the middle of a draft where you think, oh, I don't know anything about that. Now, you have a choice there, which is you can stop everything and do your research. Or what I tend to do is I tend to leave myself a little note in the margin saying, research, go and look this up, check this out. Now, it may be that you feel that you can't continue with your novel unless you have this key piece of information in place. That's a fair point. Maybe then you do stop and have to check that out. But me, generally, it tends to be little things. Like there's a book I'm working on. I need to know about the day in the life of a goat herder. And it's only going to be a tiny, I was just thinking, I don't know anything about goat herders. So I'm going to go and look that up. And then it's going to be, it'll be hours of me looking on YouTube or scrolling through things just to get a couple of lines, just so we have those little touches, those little things that can make all the difference. For bigger stuff, so for my last novel, I had to write about post-traumatic stress disorder, and I'd done a little research. I wrote a draft based on that research, but I knew that was never going to be enough. So you have to speak to people. I think, think about your sources. I spoke to people who had gone through this and was very open with them and said, because the great first question to ask is, what do people get wrong about your situation, your job, your expertise? That opens people up, and they will always say, oh, great. Well, they always get this, that, and that wrong. So when it came to talking about that, I listened, I recorded the conversations, and like Graham, when the book was done, I put them in the acknowledgements and I sent them a copy. Just say, look, you have helped make this happen. You've helped make this a better book as well. You might not be able to go direct to the source because you might be writing about something historical. Well, there will be diaries, there might be letters, there might be journals. Get as close as you can to those original sources. You may be lucky that the other novels and films have done it. Again, so dip into those, see how they've done it. If, like Graham, you might think, well, that's just the same old tropes in crime novels or whatever. Think of how you can do it differently. And also get your hands dirty, when it comes to research. You'd be amazed how the words I'm an author can open doors and get you into places that I think I mentioned before. I got into the Kubrick archives in the Elephant and Castle. I got to see all of Stanley Kubrick's archives because we were authors researching a book, which we never actually wrote. But, it can make a huge difference. And then make notes, put it in your Scrivener document, then forget it. Just sprinkle very, very lightly. It's like a spice. You just need just enough to add some flavor. Just those little things that make a difference, that add substance to it. Graham was talking about that rower who sailed the Atlantic. Of course, he could have, dedicated entire chapters to sailing the Atlantic and the ups and downs of that. But no, he said he just wanted the tiny little details and touches that make that difference.
Brilliant stuff. Excellent. Well, listen, folks, so we hope that has inspired you to delve into your research and really enjoy the process. I've got to say, it's one of the parts of the process I love the most, and I do because I just love learning about new things. And goat herding. When would you ever have an opportunity to learn that? I think it's
exactly.
Well, but it's also, it just shows you just a completely different type of life that someone else leads. And I remember delving deep into like pyramids and all of the ley lines and Glastonbury for our novel. Great. And it was just, I got such more appreciation of what was really going on there. And if you're fascinated in the subject as well, that's another reason to pick that to write about, because you then get to the fun of actually get deep diving in it as well. So brilliant stuff, folks. So listen, we hope you enjoyed this extended edition today. Please do tell your friends, spread the word about the podcast. That's how it works. We've always grown this podcast through word of mouth. So please, if you can think of someone today that you think might benefit from hearing this extended version, then let them know about the podcast and how they can support it as well. So, Mr. Stay, wins this week.
Yes, so Inkborn Blade on Twitter, who writes as JW Langton, Will, as we know him, he says, I have multiple wins and a dream declaration for the bestseller experiment. October was my best ever month with 23,000 words. I finished the first draft of my working process and a short story for an anthology submission. Now for the goal. The Lost Goddess, which is his novel, is going to be ready for SPFBO. Now, this is the thing that I'm going to get this wrong now. It's basically a science fiction fantasy kind of competition. I think ends in June, or the deadline is in June. So Will's declaration is for June 2024. Bring it on. So good luck with that, Will. Brilliant, got Will. Everything crossed for you there. And just a fun little one from Rosie Moore here. It says, having fun with my NaNoWriMo project because I like to make life more challenging for myself. I'm doing it all on the typewriter. That's a first. That's, and then I'll do the second draft on the computer. It does make it harder to keep track of my word count, but the dopamine hit I get from bashing at the old style keys more than makes up for it. So that's, you're earning the words there with a clackety clack, and it is very satisfying.
I guess there is something about that, isn't there? Because I've always heard about the importance of like audible anchoring. And I guess you're getting that with the sound. Yeah, I never thought about that. Interesting. It's like your word count in audio.
Yeah, clackety clackety clacks. Good.
And
now, I believe you have a win.
Yeah,
You've
we've
got
been
win
sent a win here from
hot off the press.
I know, hot off the press. Nicole, literally, well, this is morning. See, it's straight onto the podcast. Nicole Machowski, who joined the Academy when we first opened it 3 years ago now. Hello, Miss Mark S and Mark D. Well, I finally did it. The novel I started in September 2019 as my BXP Academy project is now complete and out into the wild.
Brilliant.
The End of the Dew Line. Great title. Nick has published this on Amazon under the pen name Nick Keys. That's Keyes. And she said, hitting publish was just the start. I've got many more steps ahead, including setting up the website, landing page, not done, and actual marketing beyond friends and family. We all know about that when we put the first book out there. And she said, as I learn in the Academy, I must overcome the resistance of the humble writer and shout about it. So, well, we're shouting about it for you, Nick. Congratulations. You see, and inspiring people there, you just keep pushing forwards and it is done. I know Nick's had an incredibly busy life with kids and schools and all kinds of things. So congratulations to you,
brilliant.
Nick.
Congrats, Nick. We'll pop a link in the show notes so people can check that out.
Fantastic, folks. Well, listen, folks, if you've enjoyed this episode of the Bestseller Experiment, please do tell your friends. It's the way this experiment keeps on going. And if you know anyone that could get any kind of value from today's episode, please drop them a note. Put it on your Facebook page. Whack it up. Share it on Instagram and Pinterest. In fact, how can people do that, Mark, with socials?
Yes, you'll find us on Facebook at Bestseller Experiment and Twitter, Instagram and Threads. We are at Bestseller XP. Come and say hello. And yes, share. We put up regular posts about the 200 word a day challenge and all sorts of other fun stuff. Do please share those because it really does help people get their books finished. And if you've enjoyed this week's interview with Graham or any of the other authors we've had on the podcast, please give us a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe. That really helps make us visible as well. And a big thank you to editors Dave and JD as well.
Absolutely. And don't forget, folks, if you'd like to join the Academy 2024, now is the time to register interest. Pop along to the website, academy.bestsellerexperiment.com. So, Mr. Stay, until next week, it's a goodbye from Mark 1.
And a goodbye from Mark 2.
Goodbye.